This week's featured guest on the Let's Get Growing show is LaManda Joy. LaManda is an author, speaker, master gardener, and a firm believer that the world is a better place with more gardeners in it. She is the founder and former executive director of the award winning Chicago based nonprofit food gardening education program, Peterson Garden Project, and the author of Start a Community Food Garden, the Essential Handbook by Timber Press. LaManda frequently speaks on the importance of community and gardening education across the country in both public and business settings. She is co founder of the Great Grow Along, a virtual spring garden festival dedicated to bringing together the worldwide community of gardeners with great education, connection, and joy. Let's welcome LaManda Joy to our Let's Get Growing show. Thank you, LaManda, for joining with us this week.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. So great to have you here. I'll just quickly share a story about how I came to know you. I was um, years ago, after I've just really started growing my passion for gardening, wanted to expand on some of the smaller spaces that I had, and I wanted to find a community garden in my area, but there wasn't any that was local enough to me. So I immediately thought, well, you know what? If there isn't one that's local enough to me, I'm going to start one myself. And then, right about the time that I actually thought about this, I was putting out some posts on a Facebook group that I have about the idea of wanting to start a community garden. And someone contacted me and said, "Oh, you know what? There's actually someone who's already getting the start of process to do one at our local park called Union Park down the street from where I lived." And I thought, "Oh, that's great." And at the time, I had purchased your book,
Good.
Start a Community Food Garden, and with the idea again that I was going to do that myself. And then I went and met up with the lady who was starting the one at the Union Park, and I then loaned the book to her so that she could make sure she had all the great pointers that she needed in order to get that garden started. And it ended up being a really fun project that we both got involved with together too. So you really kind of helped us out by putting this book out there too, and gave us some really good pointers on getting our community garden started. So thanks for writing that book for sure.
Oh, I'm so glad. That makes me happy. When you write a book, it's sort of like you put it out in the universe. It's like you sprinkling your magic out there and then you don't always hear, the stories
Yeah.
that happen. But, my number one piece of advice in that book is join a community garden that's already started, like
Yes,
join
exactly.
forces versus trying to, start on your own. If you must, for whatever reason, then please follow the
Yep.
handbook. But I, I feel like people joining together is always the best option.
Yeah, kind of on a similar tone as what we were talking about with Joey and Holly in the previous segment was kind of like, you get started with a project and you kind of get over not overwhelmed, but over uh doing the project and letting it consume you a little bit. So ultimately I was kind of happy that someone else was taking the lead in putting this community garden together, because for me it would have consumed everything I was doing for sure, but it still ended up being a pretty good project for all of us. So let's dive back into some of our questions. We like to talk about everybody's garden story here on Let's Get Growing. So let's talk a little bit about what was your first gardening experiences. How did you get started in the whole gardening world?
Well, I think like many people, I had a family member that was a gardener. In this case, it was my dad, my beloved daddy. And I grew up in rural Oregon, a little town called St. Helens on the Columbia River. And we, lived about 7 miles from town. And it was a very sort of sheltered, beautiful life. And my dad had a garden, and every year, I got enlisted to work in the garden. And I can't say that I loved it at the time because, as kids lower to the ground, weeding often was the task that we, were assigned. I'm sure I'm not the only person. I know I'm not the only person in that boat. But, many of my very first memories come from gardening. I remember I probably was 4 years old. I remember running down the path of beets on one side and something else on the other side. And there was this beautiful spider web in between. And I remember, just stopping and just having this moment of awe because of the garden. So, yeah, I have a lot of great memories, and I think that that joy, and my father was also a very spiritual gentleman. We lost him in 2013, but he was, very saw God's beauty in nature, and so
Yeah.
he, I think, really instilled that sense of awe with the garden and the sense of joy that it can bring, that I, have carried with me in all the things that I do. Like, as you read in the intro, I do
Mhm.
believe the world's a happier place with more gardeners in it. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that that is just a direct reflection of my tutelage in the garden with my wonderful father.
Yeah, that's really awesome. That's a great story too. A little bit later on in life for me, but a similar thing as I was getting started with my garden. I'd have my daughter around, and she's just, she's a little bit older. She's in her early 20s, but she took kind of that same kind of thought, like, oh, weeding and all this stuff. I'm not too sure about all of that. But again, through my passion and the things that I've been doing through gardening, she's found it just a little bit more fascinating each and every year. And this year, she finally came to me and said, Dad, I want to grow my own cucumbers like you did that first time that you started gardening too. So I'm looking forward to be able to help her get her first garden started. But really great story when it comes down to it. I really love it how a lot of us can get involved with family members and people we really care about who kind of teach us and kind of get us started on that passion for growing things and all of that. And you're absolutely right, we need more gardeners in the world. It's even better when there are. And the gardening community is one of the best gardening or communities that I've gotten to know anywhere in my life. So again, more, and that's what we love to do, is be able to share with people and help them grow their passion for growing as well too. So, when did you grow your first garden on your own?
I grew my first garden on my own probably in my early 20s. I grew up in St. Helens, and then I went to the University of Oregon, and I went to another school in between. But it was probably 92, put in my first garden, learned the hard way about sun. I was very excited about having these two raised beds flanking the path up to the house, like the
Yeah.
concrete path. And I didn't think at the time, like, oh, there's a big oak tree there. So installed the beds, put in the soil, and there's like, oh, shoot. So we had to move the whole thing to a different spot. But that was my first experience.
Yeah, definitely. Those what one of those first lessons that you got to really learn when you're starting your first garden is, where is the sun going to be? One of the most important factors for growing the things that we want to grow in our gardens. And I had to learn a similar thing too. I have a lot of south facing walls. So, there's a lot of shade that comes into spaces. So I've had to find and be real creative in finding places where I could put a garden in order to ensure that they get enough light. So, through this process, you grew up learning to garden, you started your own garden and all of that. And I'm sure after a while, what was it that you ended up like? What did you like most about the gardening experience?
Well, I want to fast forward a little bit to my second adult garden, and that's when, I was living in Chicago, and
Yeah.
I had many years where I wasn't able to garden, and there weren't a lot of community gardens, and I was living in a condo at one point, and I could have sort of rallied everybody, but I really just wanted to grow food. Like, my thinking
Yeah.
back then was, if you can't eat it, why bother? So, we specifically found a house in the city where it's really tough because you have these ancient trees shading things, or not ancient, but you don't want to mess with the trees in a city,
Yeah.
or there's a building shadowing it, whatever. So we specifically bought a house to put in what we called the Yarden, which was, beautiful full sun garden. That's how I started blogging and, getting really into the food gardening thing. So anyway, that was really the garden that got me, going as an adult
Yeah.
with the food gardening thing, and sort of kick started a new life for me. Before that, I
Yeah.
was in a corporate job and, doing something completely different.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Also, something we were talking about before too. It's kind of amazing where once you get started with growing things and that passion kind of builds up inside of you, that it just kind of takes you on this whole new adventure in your life. That's the same for me, for sure, definitely. So, what are some of those favorite things that you like to grow in the garden?
Well, I'm between gardens now because, after almost 30 years in Chicago, in November of 21, I moved back unexpectedly to Oregon
Okay.
because my mother had some health issues. And so that sort of changed everything for me. But the stuff, we grew a lot in our yard, and like we'd have 90 different tomato plants, we'd have all sorts of stuff. But ultimately, after many years of growing food, I decided that I wanted to grow things that either I couldn't get somewhere else, or they would
Yeah.
taste better if I grew them myself. So I gave up on
Yeah.
growing certain things just because I couldn't really determine, like carrots. They're fun, but I didn't feel like they were so much more amazing than the carrots that I could buy in the store. So ultimately, the
Yeah.
stuff I really loved growing was tomatoes, of course, herbs for the convenience, but I love
Yeah.
growing garlic, and I
Yeah.
love growing potatoes. You were talking about potatoes in the last
Yes.
section, just because it's like an Easter egg hunt, and they're so beautiful, and you can grow so many interesting things. There were
Yeah.
more, like I really love growing celery because I thought the flavor was so amazing compared to what you would get in the store. But,
Yeah.
that's what it came down for me, sort of a favorite category in, growing my own groceries versus something I could get somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely want to make those types of situations where you're figuring out what do I, want to grow versus what can I get, that makes it a little bit easier. So that way, you're really utilizing your spaces for those things that you're really going to use for sure. Any of those or any plants or anything that you grow in the garden that you found to be, kind of a challenge, something that, you found that, you weren't getting working out, like I mentioned, I always try brassicas. Brassicas continue to be a challenge for me even after all of my years of gardening. And any of those for you that you have that you just, I don't know if you've given up on or you're determined to figure out, but present just a bit of a challenge.
I would find, now I didn't really have one thing that never worked, but I would find every year something was weird.
Yeah.
Like one year the beans were very difficult, and beans shouldn't be difficult. But then I talk to people and they're like, yeah, I'm having a weird time with beans too. So I sort of saw those things happening, and it made me feel like, it's another thing of the shared community of gardeners. Like there's something going on, something going on that we maybe can't figure out with the weather or something. So
Yeah.
I can't say there was any one thing, but I can tell you the one thing I was glad that happened and grew very well every year, and that's I'm in love with nasturtiums. So, if I
Oh
had
yeah.
one thing to plant, I would plant nasturtiums everywhere.
Yes, those are nice. I love the nasturtium flowers and all of that too. Those are great. I actually just started growing those for the first time this last season and found them to be really cool. I really enjoy those too as well. Um, when it when it comes to growing these different things in your garden, what are so I asked you what the favorite things are, and what's most difficult. So, what are some of those things that again, that you're growing that not necessarily a challenge, but you find difficult to grow?
Um, I feel like squash and cucumbers sometimes can be difficult because of powdery mildew or
Yes.
space. So I had some challenges with that. I really started growing the smaller bush varieties versus the long trailing things, and got very
Yeah.
careful about making sure that there was enough airflow around them. So
Yeah.
those can pose some challenges. I'm really excited right now, and as I said, I'm a between gardens, so I won't be able to, try it this year. But I'm really excited about some of the sort of the micro size things that are happening for
Yeah.
container. Calling container gardening, but small space
Yeah.
gardening, where they're really meant to not hog up a lot of space and yet produce
Yeah.
full size big harvests. So
Yeah.
we had a session for Great Grow Along with Victory Seed, Dave
Mhm.
Whittinger, and he did a thing about best vegetables for small spaces and outlined some stuff, like really people have done companies have done a good job with traditional breeding tactics to bring stuff down to smaller sizes, but still having the good flavor and the good output. So
Yeah.
to answer your question, squash and cucumbers. But I think
Yeah.
that people are I think everybody has those problems. So I think the
Yes.
seed people are, being smart and coming up with solutions for them.
Yes, definitely. I've been enjoying some different varieties of things that are smaller for even smaller containers, even. I always get a lot of questions about that too. I prefer to grow, say, like a 5 gallon at least. But
Mm.
a lot of people always ask, what can I grow in a 2 gallon? What can I grow in like a 3 gallon? And one of the ones that I found too is they have this small micro tomato for everybody loves
Yes.
growing tomatoes called Orange Hat, and so those can grow perfectly in nice, even like a 1 gallon
Yes.
container, and you can just grow a bunch of them and put them all over in different spaces that you can find. So those micro tomatoes are really great. And then Baker Creek has a couple of lettuce varieties too that grow these really small, like hand size. One of them's called Little Gem.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the other one was called, but they have these really small head lettuces and everything too. So you can really kind of, really optimize the space that you have in a small space garden. So that really goes in line with what you're talking about. More and more of those type of things would be great.
Yeah. And, I feel like um, the definition of gardening is changing over the last decade. Like I think 10 years ago when we started Peterson Garden Project, the concept of a raised bed was kind of strange because people were very used to gardening being here's the row of onions and here's the row of this and here's the row of this. So people are now used to raised beds. Great. But I think, food gardening in containers is really opening up for people's minds. And I think that because of some of the great self-watering technology that's happening with like Crescent Gardens. I think they're the leader in it. But there's other like earth boxes and things like that. People are
Yeah,
realizing that they can have a small space, be very productive, and it's not, a ton of work, even just on a balcony. So
yeah.
that's really been fun to watch the evolution of that.
Yeah, that's actually one of my more popular videos that I have on our Urban Gardener channel is how to put together a self-watering, or well, they don't really water themselves, but a water wicking buckets. And we use 5 gallon buckets as a 2 bucket system where you keep a water reservoir in the bottom bucket that, during those hot months just really helps out when it comes to watering because if you live anywhere that where it gets really warm, that you could be out there 2 3 times a day trying to keep us a container, specifically, watered well enough to not dry out the plant. So these wicking buckets are really perfect for doing those sort of things. So I always can encourage people to give those a try if you have a small space, and you can grow almost anything out of a container. You really can. And I've
And I think it's important to keep people interested in gardening because, we had so many people join the gardening family, and during the
yeah,
pandemic, it needs to be easy because they're not
yeah,
coming to it necessarily from a father like you or my father
yeah,
that, taught us. They're just maybe jumping in and not having that experience. So they're learning from social media influencers or they're learning from books or what have you. And I think that,
yeah.
that ease is
Hmm.
important, because gardening, especially what you're saying, you can get overwhelmed by weeds, you can get overwhelmed by watering, you can get
Yeah,
overwhelmed by pests.
yeah,
So, as simple as we can make it for people, the more chance we have of making the world a happier place with long-term gardeners. Like
that's
we don't
right.
want people to jump in and fail and not be happy. We want them to,
Yeah.
like with channels like yours to provide great solutions and information for people to keep it as simple as possible. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, yeah, there are so many variable aspects to gardening, so many different things that can present a challenge. And it's one of the things I always tell people if you're new, don't let some of those things discourage you, you know. But again, too, having those things that help make things easy, similar to what I was talking about with those wicking buckets, they can be placed anywhere, they can be moved around if you need to, if you're dealing with challenges with your lighting in the sun, like you were talking about, just those sort of things that really help gardeners be able to figure out some of those challenges that they're dealing with. And definitely, definitely great. So let's move on now too. So you've been growing and you've been gardening and you've got this different garden experience and all of that, and you decided that you were going to write a book. So what really inspired you to write that book, start a community food garden?
Yeah. Well, I had started Peterson Garden Project in 2010, and I was at the
Yeah.
time, working in a corporate job where I traveled 80% of the time. So I wanted to bring my experience as a business leader to my new passion. And I dove in. You talked earlier about how it's easy to dive in and become obsessed with something. And I joined the board of the American Community Gardening Association. And what I noticed is that many organizations were wanting to change their environmental or their community, impact their community with gardens, whether it was a food garden or, just a green space or what have you. And a lot of organizations were popping up like ours, Peterson Garden Project, a lot of nonprofits were happening, and, people really wanted to use gardens to, create resilience in a lot of ways, a lot of beautiful ways. And so what I was seeing is that everybody was sort of going through the same poodle hoops, and there was no resource to learn how to mitigate challenges or just make things happen faster. Like I really wanted to share what I had learned with Peterson Garden Project. And, one of the reviewers, it was, one of the top 10 books of 2014, but one of the reviewers said, I'm not sure this is a book about gardening because the author doesn't talk about plants till page 146. And, as you saw, it's like, how do you do an agenda? How do you keep volunteers engaged? These are all sort of the nuts and bolts
Yeah.
things that when people think community garden, they think plants, like
Yeah.
we're going to
Yeah.
be able to grow plants. But
Exactly.
if you don't form that community and make it easy on the organizers and, the volunteers, then the longevity of it is maybe a little shorter. So that was the genesis of it. And I was at an event and ran into Timber Press and just said, how come there's not more gardens about community or more books about community gardens? And that's how it started. And they're like, well, why don't you write one? I'm like, okay, that'd be fun. Writing a book is quite an ordeal. We
Yeah.
had already written and self-published a book for Peterson Garden Project called Fearless Food Gardening in Chicagoland, which was
Yeah.
to make it as simple as possible for urban gardeners that had, maybe never grown before. So I kind of knew what I was getting myself into, but it was a lot. It was a lot to write that book. But I'm so happy when I hear stories like yours, or,
Yeah.
sometimes people randomly send me like, I saw your book at the library, or I got your book and it changed how we did our garden. It's really nice to be able to hear those stories.
Yeah, it was definitely a really helpful book for us when we got our community garden started here locally. And that was one of the things that I think that was great about the book, as you explain. It's not necessarily about how to grow things. It's not necessarily about plants. It's literally about getting something started, how to organize, how to put those things together so that you can have something that's available in your community. And then once you've got that started, and like we saw in our community garden, was all of these people who had never really gardened before, because they were walking by as we're getting everything started, seeing it all come together and everything, and then started signing up to have their own garden plots. So, just starting a community garden like that in our local neighborhood, we created, as you talked about, we created more gardeners, you know what I mean? And got more people involved with the whole idea. And I think that's, really great. And it's, it really is, as you say, it's an essential handbook for sure to getting something like that started. And I think more and more communities could really use more community gardens. There's places where there's a ton of them. I know in Los Angeles there's a community garden almost every couple of them, almost every neighborhood. They have a ton of them there. But then there's some smaller communities in smaller cities like my own that really only had a couple, and some of them were just a little too far away for me. So if that's the case for you and you're out there, you're watching us now too, get this book, and go start up a community garden in your neighborhood and help us build and develop more gardeners in the world for sure.
Just a note on that, one of the things that's so hard for gardens is fundraising. Gardening Know-How, I did a series of interviews with community gardens around the country. They offer a grant that anybody can apply for. It's open year round. And sometimes, that first little bump of financing,
Hmm.
it's a major piece because lumber costs money, fencing
Yep.
costs money, soil costs money, hoses cost money. Like you
Yeah.
can hope that your community can donate those things or local businesses will donate them, but sometimes you need a little help. So I think that
Yeah.
that's an important resource. There's other grants out there as well, but don't forget that funding piece because it's
That's
it's
true.
really critical.
That's very true. And for us, we were just really lucky that our city just jumped right on board.
That's great.
We went and talked to a few of our local councilmen, and they were just like, "Oh, this is a great idea. Let's see what we can do." And the city came out for us and gave us, everything essential that we needed in order to get started. Because like you said, there's so many different pieces that really requires some money coming out of somewhere. And luckily for us, our community was really helpful with that. But again, you might not have a community that's that helpful, and you might need to reach out and find some grants and some things. But there are organizations out there that will help and do that sort of stuff. And let's step back too, because you also mentioned you are the executive director of the nonprofit education program, the Peterson Garden Project. So how did that kind of develop? How did that get started, and what was its goal and mission?
Well, I'd started this garden. I called it the Yarden, and I started blogging. And I thought, having come from Oregon, I
Yeah.
thought I'll reach out and find the other food gardeners. And what I found is that in Chicago there weren't a lot of food gardeners, and so
Yeah.
I was like, oh, for the first time in my life, I felt like I had something that I could share with people. So that was one part of it. The other part of it was, I had this fabulous daddy and a wonderful mother as well, and I'm adopted, and they adopted me sort of late in life, and they were both greatest generation. So my mother was a Rosie the Riveter, and my dad was in the occupied forces. And
Oh,
so, he'd moved to this new neighborhood, and, I was so inspired by my parents, and I was sort of hooked on the idea of victory gardens because, in 2009, 2010, the world was going through the economic meltdown, the housing
yeah.
meltdown. And so there were a lot of properties in the city where developers weren't going to be doing anything.
Yeah.
And so one day I was driving by this empty lot near our house, and I kept, we had just moved to that neighborhood, so I was just trying to get a lay of the land and support the local businesses. And I was standing at the butcher counter one day, and there was this photo on the wall of a World War II victory garden. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I was talking with Ruben while I was waiting for my chicken. He was explaining what he knew about it. And then one day I realized that the lot that I had been sort of eyeballing was the lot in the photo.
Yeah.
And I almost killed us because I'm like, it's the lot for the picture, the lot for the picture. And my husband's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Pull over, you're going to kill us. And so, that's really was the impetus. There's this empty lot, and I had been reaching out, and I knew people wanted to garden, and maybe I could contribute something. And that's how all that started.
Yeah.
Um, our goal was always teaching people. It wasn't long-term land acquisition. We knew these gardens were short-term, so we called them pop-up victory gardens. And over the course
Yeah.
of my involvement, we had 12 of them. And these are big gardens. We had like
Yeah.
25,000 people go through this program, over the course of the 10 years that I was involved. But it was
Yeah.
really about teaching people, because many community gardens become sort of like an insular thing, like here's the 20 people that do it, and it's our thing, stay out. And that wasn't what we wanted. We wanted places where people could learn, they could have the resources available to learn. Back then we would do an organic plant start sale, veggie sale, because a lot of garden centers weren't selling organic veggies at the time.
Yeah.
It was just a little bit of a different world. It's kind of like what we're living in now is kind of the dream come true. Like there's all sorts of garden education available. The volume is turned up on organic and the benefits of that. And so, the mission of really teaching people, I feel like we really fulfilled it in the 10 years that I was the leader of that organization.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like a really great project and something that was really kind of needed in your area. And that's something that still goes on today. They still,
Well, I stepped down as executive director in 2019, and then the pandemic happened. And so Peterson Garden Project is now, those gardens are turning back over to the communities where they're at. Instead of like the big
okay.
overarching thing, we've sort of
Yeah.
developed it. And now it's going back to the people that, the neighborhoods, so they can
Yeah.
manage it.
Yeah. You built it up and now you're letting them run with it and take care of it. So that's really great, though, that you're able to do that. So, one of the things that I wanted to bring you on the show for, our very first guest and a really good friend of mine is Wendy Fan.
Yeah,
She
I
has
love Wendy.
wendyland.com, and she's a really good friend of our channel and done a lot of different interviews with us. And one of the things she was mentioning on her appearance on our show was the Great Grow Along and being involved with that there too. So, you are the co-founder of the Great Grow Along, which is actually a virtual spring garden festival.
Yes. You ready for me to pontificate about the Great
Oh,
Girl?
yes, I'd love to hear all about it.
Well, first, I'm sorry that we weren't able to chat when it was going on, but
Yeah.
it is a massive endeavor. We started after I did Peterson Garden Project. I really felt that I wanted to create sort of a new type of garden center where it was education based and organic and as many sustainable products as possible. So we started a business called City Grange in 2019, which is the worst possible time to start a new business. Plus, I had my family situation happen in 2021. So we were not able to make the traction with that we wanted. But in 2020, at the end of 2020, I had come from the event industry before, I left and started doing gardening. And my husband was also from the event industry. He's one of the co-founders. And we had this partner who is in the PR industry for the garden world. And so we were like, okay, we're living through this pandemic. Our mission was to teach people. My life's calling is to teach people how to grow food. What are we going to do if people can't get together? Plus 18 million people, are they getting good education? Are they getting stuff that's going to make them succeed so they live on as gardeners? So we thought, well, why don't we do this event? We'll give it a shot. And so we did it for the first time in 2021. At that time, it was a 3-day event. And I think we had like 36 speakers. And the idea being, it's like curated. There's a lot of stuff out there. How do you find the best education? And then how do we coach people to be maybe speaking to a national audience? We didn't know, we were Chicago based. So we thought it would be sort of Midwest, and it turned out to be all over the place. We're like, oh, wow, that was interesting. So we're like, well, let's do it again. So we did it again in 2022, and we decided we were going to stretch it out so it wouldn't kill us because it was a lot to do 36 sessions in 3 days. We spread it out over 10 days. We're like, let's see how it goes. And then that year we had 27,000 people participate. So we're like,
Wow.
there's a need here, like we knew it. I knew it because I just lived through a decade of running a
Yeah.
nonprofit and speaking all over the country about it. Like, okay. And so this year we did it again. We did the same 10-day format. We, find the best speakers like Wendy and, people that are recognized, socially, but also authors and horticulturalists. We just really want the best content for people. And so we just finished on the 19th. And this year we had 56,000 people participate. And,
Wow.
it's just amazing how no matter how much information is out there, there's always somebody new or somebody that wants to learn something specific.
Hmm.
People really like long form content. It's like what you're doing. There's so
Yeah.
much right now, like short form content on social or what have you. But people like to get together and learn and have an opportunity to chat together. And, people spend an average of 27 minutes viewing those sessions, which is kind of unheard of in
Wow.
the doom scroll society that we live in, like just the
Yeah.
fast pace. So yeah, so
Hmm.
we just finished the event and it was a wild success. And now we're planning for 2024. And yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, it's really great. I really like the whole idea of it too. Like you said, it's a virtual festival. There's so much going on, so many different speakers talking about all sorts of different aspects of gardening, and you guys put it together really well. I really enjoyed some of the sessions this year,
Well, thank
and
you.
really looking forward to what you got growing on with it this next season as well too. So again, I encourage everybody who's watching too, you can check out down below to a link to the Great Grow Along. I believe that's at just greatgrowalong.com, right? And check out all the different things that they have going on this year. And are these still available online? Are there?
We left them available till the 31st. So people, if they couldn't catch it live, they could watch it. And now it's on demand. So if people are interested in that, we have all 3 years, like 100, what is it, 90, 120 great sessions. So
Yeah.
it's available on demand as well.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, so definitely go check that out and check out some of the great different speakers that they have. You can go and check out our friend Wendy Fan as well too. She puts on a great session. She's really good speaker and really gives a lot of great information. She's probably one of my favorite small space gardeners. It's just amazing what she can do with just a little bit of space. So
Who are some of your other favorite small space gardeners?
oh, there's quite a bit of people. I watch so much, it's hard to even list like who and all of that. But I follow so many like YouTube channels, so many Instagrammers. It's really kind of the concept of this show and everything was to kind of get together all of my favorite people and be able to put them on and highlight and tell their stories and talk about the different things that they're doing and growing and everything in their spaces. So that's kind of what you get. Some of the people that you've seen here on my show so far and some of the guests that we'll have coming up in the future, and many, many more too. And hopefully, again, that's kind of been my mission too, is that, there's so many wonderful people in the gardening community. It's like I said before, it's my favorite community. Everybody is wonderful. Everybody is awesome. And I just want to be able to talk to everybody. I want to be able to share their experiences, share their gardening and all of that too. So
Well, can I just say kudos to you for, I mean, I know how hard it is to do a virtual event and the organizing and all that, but kudos to you for doing it on a weekly basis because
yeah.
like Joey was saying, it's not just the hour, I'm talking a lot, so maybe a little bit more than an hour today, but
Oh
it's
yeah.
not just that. It's, as you say, the passion for the people, it's the organizing, it's the
Hmm.
promotion. It's a lot. They've been doing it for 7 years. Mike Novak's been doing it for a long time. You've been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
You deserve a round of applause because it's not
Well, thank
easy,
you.
like it's not easy to do that.
Yeah, it's not easy, and I can't do it myself either, too. So the round of applause is also shared with my wonderful producer, Asia, who's just right across the way helping us handle everything here, too. And then in the chat, too, our moderator and other producer that we have, Michelle, she's just awesome as well, too. And they really helped me put together this show. And like you said, it's a lot of work to do this sort of stuff. We put a lot into it, and I'm sure as you can tell, just through our communication, emails get lost. You're trying to make sure things are all lined up just right. There's so many things that kind of create a little bit of pressure when it comes down to it. But
Yeah.
when the cameras go live, we were all about having fun and enjoying ourselves and having a great conversation about all of our fun that we have in the garden and the different projects that we get to do. And again, I'm just really thankful for you and your book and all of the different things that you do to organize all of those great gardeners for your great grow along, another just wonderful event. And real quick though, too, I'll give you a chance here to give any sort of advice or tips that you have for newer gardeners, or anything you want to let anybody know about gardening, or future projects, or anything that you might also have.
Well, my bit of advice is I was thinking this earlier when we were chatting about success. You know,
Hmm.
new gardeners' enthusiasm sometimes is a barrier to success. Like I
Yes.
so many times had people where you had a 4 by 8 bed and people would come with enough plants for 5 times as that. Like the enthusiasm new gardeners have is so great, but it
Yeah,
also, sometimes makes them tired, makes them not succeed, makes them learn some tough lessons. So I would just say,
that's right.
take it easy on yourself. It's not a marathon. It's not a
Yeah.
sprint, it's a marathon, like just start slow, start with the stuff you want to eat. And then you got time, like you got
Yeah.
time. Don't let that spring fever make you crazy. So that would be my advice for new gardeners. In terms of projects, we're doing this, the Great Grow Along this next year. We're going to have even more sort of beautiful, inspirational content because there's a lot of how-to stuff out there. Like we want to
Yeah.
have how-to and have it be the best how-to, but also just, let people see stuff they might not see otherwise. Because having been in the garden world now for, I don't know, 15 years, as
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of amazing stuff out there. There's a lot of amazing public gardens. There's a lot of amazing trial gardens. There's a lot of amazing just ways of thinking about problem solving and stuff like that. So I'm excited about, the evolution for the next year. I'm really excited about this. There's a potential we might do a UK version. And
Oh,
I
yes.
am very much an Anglophile, especially when it comes to their gardens. So that could be a lot of fun. So I'm hoping that
Yes.
that's going to pan out. The other thing I'm really excited about, having written books, and many of our speakers this year, I think 22 of our speakers were also authors. That
Yeah.
process of turning thoughts in your head into a tangible thing is a
Yeah.
very strange process. It's like being part of a weird club. So we had started a channel on our YouTube channel called Garden Book Joy, where I'm talking to garden authors about their books and that sort of process. So we're going to get back to that now that the event's over. And I also feel very passionate. I went to University of Oregon and I volunteered on an environmental publication for many years as a college student. And it's always, being growing up in Oregon and being around the beauty, and it's very
Mhm.
environmentally friendly here. It always has been,
Yes.
like my parents composted and didn't think it was a thing, like you
Yeah.
just did those things. You're very frugal with recycling and reusing stuff. And so um, I'm really interested in the sustainability aspects of how we change the industry, if you will. Many of our sponsors this year have a sustainability bent to what they do, and it's not easy to do. So I'm doing a session in April at the with GardenCom, which is an association for garden communicators. And if you're not a member, then let me talk to you about that offline at
Yes.
some point. But we're talking about some of the challenges, like consumers want sustainable products, but the
Yeah.
speed to getting them to be truly sustainable and not greenwashing from an industry perspective is tough. So I'm excited to start talking about that, like help
Yeah.
consumers know what those products are, but also understand the challenges of bringing something to market. You can't just
Yeah.
snap your fingers. There's supply chain, there's production issues, there's distribution, there's awareness,
Yeah.
there's all of those things. So I'm super excited to start that conversation so we can, as a community, think about sustainability in the garden.
Yeah, yeah, you got so many awesome things, and you're so right about all that behind the scenes type of stuff when it comes to all the different things that go on, whether it's doing a show or putting out some sort of product or writing a book, and doing all those things, starting a community garden, and it's really great that you're involved with a lot of that stuff and help people understand those sort of things as that process is going through. And really awesome for you to join with us here and talk about all of these great things that you've got growing on. And really enjoyed having you here, Joy. And thank you again for being with us here on the Let's Get Growing show.
I appreciate it. And I know that I was probably a problem child trying to get you the information you needed. We had some junk mail
Oh,
issues, but I appreciate your
no.
tenacity and I think you're doing a great job. And, you know, you know, this movement with gardening and people finding common ground, pardon the pun, but common ground, no matter what their demographic is or their politics or their location, like I think, as I said before, the world's a happier place with more gardeners in it. So thanks for doing your part in making the world a happier place.
Oh, awesome. Again, thank you so much. I really appreciate the compliments, and I have just as many for you and all the work that you do. And again, being such a big part of my garden experience and everything too. It was definitely awesome to be able to get you on for our first season of our show because, again, like I said, you had a big part to play in how I got started gardening with our community garden. You really wrote a really great book, and I encourage everybody as well to go grab this book, buy it, organize, get together, put together a community garden in your community, and help us grow the gardening community with more wonderful gardeners. It's really awesome. And thanks again, Joy, for being here with us.
Thank you. I look forward to talking in the future.